Hi everyone, welcome to Potluck Food Talks. Today we're going to talk about drinks.
Drinks.
Can we talk about no drinks?
What kind of drinks you want to talk about? I mean, we just spent 20 minutes talking about coffee. You know, I mean, what is there? Milk?
No, man, milk is for psychopaths. Haven't you noticed that all psychopaths in movies drink milk? Like, Hans Landa, Alex in A Clockwork Orange, Leon the professional.
Leon isn't a psychopath. He's a nice guy.
Well, he's just a professional hitman. We can agree on that. He's not a psychopath.
Yeah. So does that make every baby a psychopath?
No. Just milk lovers. People that are, like grown-up people that have like a glass of milk. That's just psychos.
Okay, so what's coffee for then?
Workaholics or tormented souls, like the Oracle in the Matrix drinks coffee, or Harrison Ford in Blade Runner, also coffee drinker.
Debatable. Debatable. Okay, what about beer?
Beer is for hooligans, Game of Thrones characters, Homer Simpson. No glamour there. Sorry, beer nerds.
No glamour there. This is ridiculous, Eric. What happened to you? I knew you when you were a craft beer aficionado. We spent many hours in craft beer bars. Yeah. Also, beer is like a food, It's like it's what sustained Germany for hundreds of years, It used to be a base food, kind of like on the same lines as bread and potatoes and stuff,
Well, and there is a beer Nazism for sure. Like Germans invented this purity law for beer.
For beer. I thought you meant in general, yeah.
Well, they did that later, like a few centuries later. Yeah, but any beer that didn't complement, like the hops and different standard ingredients formula was banned and burned and destroyed.
Yeah, rightfully so. Because it's like, yeah, of course. Because it's like, look at the States, where you look at your ingredients and it's like a million different fucking things in there. Like bread should be the same. There should be a purity law for bread. No fucking emulsifiers and preservatives, and keep your ascorbic acid out of the fucking sourdough, It should be flour, salt, water, that's basically it. And then additives like, seeds and stuff like that is okay. But base bread should just be that.
I don't feel like talking beer right now. Any other suggestion?
No? Okay. We could talk about wine. I don't know what's much of a wino,
Wine. Wine, I think about like a lusty poet drinking its own blood. Hannibal Lecter, Interview with the Vampire, Cersei from Game of Thrones.
I don't know if I would call Hannibal Lecter a lusty poet.
No?
But
sort of.
I mean,
no. Well, Interview with the Vampire, I think for sure. No, like vampires drink blood.
Interview with a Vampire, yeah. But what about the like soccer game Chardonnay wine moms? I mean, I guess they're lusty, but not poetic.
Nah, pick a different one.
Okay. Well, what about tea? I know you like tea.
Tea is a good one. Like, I mean, if there is a character drinking tea in a movie, it's always the wisest character. Like Miyagi would drink tea, Gandalf, Professor X, Yoda,
Does Gandalf drink tea? I know he smokes a lot of pot in the movies, but...
Yeah, I know, wizards, they do these kind of things.
Tea's good.
Yeah, we can talk about tea. Tea is like an amazing topic, yeah.
Tea is an amazing topic, yeah.
Do you have any favorite tea or way of drinking tea?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a very, very... I love tea in general. I love all sorts of tea. And I drink a lot of tea, like a lot. But I have a very definite favorite tea, which is because of how I grew up. My grandparents, they spent a lot of time in Japan. And so when I was growing up in my household, every afternoon they would drink Japanese green tea, especially like sencha.
Ah, man, it's my favorite. Finally, we agree on something.
Yeah.
That's my fucking favorite tea, for sure.
It's so good. And like, even when I just smell it, I just feel so filled with calm and like positive emotions, And I especially like the ones that taste really grassy or almost like seaweed or spinach,
Yeah, for me, it's like roasted spinach and umami. So it's kind of like a dashi. Probably the dashi comes from tea culture. I could bet on that for sure.
Yeah, it's delicious. I mean, like it's so good, and I mean it's by far one of the best things that you could drink.
And it's one of those things that if you do it right, it's amazing. If you screw it up, it's whatever. You know, like the right timing, right temperature, like everything has to be properly executed to have a nice cup of nice tea, of sencha specifically.
That's true. It can go wrong really easily, and you can misbrew it really easily. Yeah.
It happens to me all the time. I became like a tea hipster a few weeks ago. I'm drinking lots of tea every day and different kinds of tea.
Yeah.
And it happens to me all the time. You know, I forget and I over infuse it, and then it's crap.
And it's shit.
You know, it's bitter. Yeah, it's fucking...
It's almost undrinkable. Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like a fucking retard, you know, for forgetting my tea or not putting a timer or anything.
Hey, have you tried cold infusing sencha?
Yeah, man. Yeah. Some of them, I think is the best way to drink it. I had
It's so good.
A present from a Japanese friend. He gave me 2 bags, one of sencha traditional. The other one is like a sencha Earl Grey mixture. I think it's sencha aromatized with Earl Grey. And that one, cold brewed, man, I think it's my favorite tea in the world. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Because Earl Grey is another one that I really like.
Yeah, Earl Grey is nice. And not everybody's a fan of the bergamot, but yeah, super, super nice. I really caught on to like cold brewed tea when I was working in Japan. So when I moved to Japan, like I said, I grew up with this like tea culture, and I was really excited because I was like, oh, I'm going to drink a lot of tea. And then I actually realized that in Japan, it's not that much of a big thing. Like you get a cup of like basic tea in a lot of restaurants, but it's not like a special tea. You don't really have tea houses like I was imagining it in my racial profiling Western mind, you know. But yeah, in the restaurant that I was working in, they were serving tea, but they didn't want to serve hot tea because they didn't want the temperature to affect the dishes. So they made several different kinds of cold infused tea, but they would add different things to the teas also. So for example, they had a green tea cold infusion where they would take chervil and like crush the stems of the chervil and put them into the cold infusion. And they would make this like super subtle, complex infusions where when you would drink it cold, it was like, I can still sort of like feel the taste like in my memory because it was just so fine and like well crafted.
I know there are like bottles of tea in Japan sold by the thousands of euros, which is, you know, like we in the West, we can expect that from wine, but from tea is something like we don't really get. Like, how is that possible? You know, like
yeah, because I mean, our cultural appreciation isn't there. I mean, here in Germany, for example, you know, the teas that people drink, it's like black tea, completely overbrewed. There's no appreciation for the quality of the tea itself. Herbal teas and aromatized teas, you know, like rooibos and that sort of stuff. Like that's really sort of like the tea culture here. But I mean, it's not something that we have local. It's all imported and it never caught on like coffee did, you know? So, and then really, you know, with Japan and also China and probably also India, the best teas, they stay in the country, you know?
For sure.
Yeah.
You know, I recently had my first trip to Asia and I was in Singapore and I went to this traditional tea house, Chinese tea house.
Yeah.
And this was for real, like a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
So first of all, the place, it looked like out of a Miyazaki fairy tale. You know, it was like, what is this? You know, like with individual rooms where you could walk into each room for your individual table and, you know, and have your tea time.
Yeah.
And there was even a picture of Queen Elizabeth having tea there, like in the 80s, surrounded by Chinese tea experts. So they had this tea menu. They would also do like dumplings, but sweet dumplings, you know, like baos filled with marmalades and this kind of, but also salty, you know, like jumcha is like a tea food category, I would say, or like a way of drinking and eating. So then this guy comes with this kung fu looking costume outfit, which is not.
Sorry. What? One sec, that's the most racist thing. The tea master came with the kung fu outfit.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I'll tell you why.
Clothes.
No, fine, I'll tell you why it's not racist or a prejudice. Because then I found out that the way of drinking tea he was teaching to us, it's called Kung Fu tea or Kung Fu tea. Because Kung Fu means skill. So this is like a way of drinking that implies like a high level of skill in the drink. So they would show us like just a very little jar, a metal jar, where you would do the infusions with a timer. And you had like two mini cups, one more like in a tube shape and the other one like a micro bowl. But I'm telling you, this is like 2 tablespoons big, each one, something like that.
Yep.
And so you would pour the tea in the first one, and this was just to smell, the tube-shaped one. So you would just smell and pour it into the other bowl, and then you would smell again in the empty glass, and the smell would change. And of course, this is like wine tasting, you know, as you go on and on and on, the aromas change because you also change, and, you know, all the variables change. And this was all different types of oolong tea, which is not specifically my favorite, but it was, you know, it's nice to have like an experience like this with Chinese tea, which are the, you know, the masters in command of tea.
Yeah, for sure. I thought, you know, like Japan was the place, but China is, the tea culture in China is, and China, and you have to add Taiwan also, is nuts. Absolutely nuts.
Yeah, and I mean like the two most common words for tea, which are te and cha, both come from China, from different regions, and they got acceptance in different regions as well. Like, for instance, in all of Europe, you say tea, but in Russia and other Eastern Europe countries, you say cha, which is also interesting.
Yeah, super interesting.
Or Mongolia or these places.
Yeah, this way of that you described of drinking tea, where you have a brewing vessel with a teapot, a smelling glass, and then a drinking glass. I think that's like one of the most beautiful and the most pure ways of drinking tea. And like, you know, the cool thing about oolong is that, you know, with like sencha, you know, it's like a very like not fermented or, you know, like very lightly roasted tea. Like it's green. With oolong, you have a huge spectrum of teas that are almost green and teas that are really, really darkly fermented. And you have a spectrum of aromas that is insane. I had a similar experience than what you described when I was in Japan. And because I was looking actively for tea places, and my roommate at the time was a very quiet Japanese guy. I was sometimes brewing tea at home because I'm also a tea nerd. And he, at some point, he came to me and he was like, "Do you like tea?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like tea." And he was like, "No, yeah." So we're drinking tea together and like a secret society. And he was like, "Next time you have a day off, I would like to take you to see a friend of mine." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And we went into like a tea house, like a private tea house, where you were in Ginza, like in the middle of the city, and you would go up the stairs into a small apartment, and it was like a tea room with the table where you pour the water into, you know, the like wooden carved table.
Yeah, exactly.
And he did a tea tasting for us, and that was the first time I really tried oolong. And it was crazy because we did exactly the same method that you were saying. We would take one tea, brew it several times, see how the tea develops. After you brew it first time, only like 10 seconds, dump, smell, drink. Then again, infuse it, 5 seconds, dump it, smell it. And the tea would change the more you brew it. And there was some like mind-blowing things. Like they had one tea and he was sort of like, "Okay, smell and like tell me what you smell." And I smelled it and it was like pure peach flavor.
Yeah.
But like the sort of peach smell that you have when you have like almost like a peach iced tea, you know, like this like fake peach smell. And I was like, "Smells like peaches." And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Is it peach flavored?" And he's like, "No, it's just tea, like nothing else, just tea." And there was another one where it was called Oriental Beauty, which had this really intense smell of like dates and orange and like insane, really, really heavily fermented, almost like a black tea, but so like light and flavorsome. It's like, it's nuts.
Did they teach you somehow how to hold the cup? Because in the tea house where I was, for me, it was, they would tell you, yeah, you have to grab the cup like this. And if you're a lady, you can leave your pinky finger exposed. If not, you have to hide it, like for gentlemen. And this position of drinking it, you're going to make fun of me again. But this reminds me of The Drunken Master with Jackie Chan, where he's drinking it and holding cups like in the same position, like.
Yeah.
And it's probably the Chinese way of holding teacups.
Is it like an etiquette thing?
Probably, like part of the ritual. Like, I don't know exactly where. And also all the Chinese stores that I visited, they would give you tea just at the entrance for free because it's something, typical from there. The other character that I found really intriguing and interesting is this guy called Kazuko Okakura. This guy, like in the mid of the 19th century, he's Japanese, obviously. He traveled to Europe where he studied fine arts and then to the United States, and he returned to Japan. We're talking about end of the 19th century, 1890, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote the Book of Tea to show us Western barbarians the delicacy and the true art form of tea. So it was from an art study perspective, how tea is an art form, drinking tea, how teaism is a religion, and all the grounds and ideas around that. Also, I think like tea, meditation and poetry really go together, and that there is a lot of angles to go into that.
Yes.
So the interesting also thing about this book is that Heidegger read that book, and it was one of his first introductions into Eastern philosophy, Asian thoughts. And so at the same time, Heidegger is one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century.
Yeah.
So it's crazy like how tea had an influence on Western philosophy. Well, Heidegger, he had like this little controversy that he was a Nazi, and that didn't help him so much.
Yeah, but nobody's perfect, Nobody's perfect.
You had this story with poets and tea, right? You told me once.
Yeah. So, I mean, like what you just mentioned, it's a whole world to dive into. This, not just the act of drinking tea and the health benefits and that, but also the philosophy behind it and the like tea culture, which sounds kind of funny if you've never been in contact with that, but which is very, very deep and very profound and very, reaching over many different countries and continents. And if you've kind of delved into that a little bit, you kind of know what it is that you're talking about with when you say that sort of like, teaism, that it's like a religion. I can immediately sort of understand what you mean, while somebody who is completely new to this might not. But it's a very beautiful community of tea drinkers. And when you were saying that drinking tea was like very affiliated with poets and artists and stuff, there used to be a practice, or maybe there still is, of poets and artists and like painters and stuff to sit somewhere and indulge in drinking tea. What I mentioned earlier, of sort of like brewing small quantities and drinking and sipping and looking out and just kind of delving in your thought and keep brewing and keep drinking and keep brewing and keep drinking. And this continuous practice of like drinking tea, because tea has a different effect on you depending on how long it's brewed, whether it's calming or it like gets you up and going. Similar sort of to caffeine. But if you drink tea in this sort of way, you get into almost an elevated state of ecstasy, of like a really elevated state, of dopamine and, just like happiness feelings and stuff. And artists would do this deliberately to get themselves like a little bit high on tea, to then sit there and look out into the countryside and draw and paint, or to philosophize and write down poems. And that was like an actual practice that they would do in combination with drinking tea. And I think that's super, super nice. And it's like, it works. I've tried it before, when I would be sitting at home and I had like, I would do this sort of little thing, brew, drink, brew, drink, brew, drink, and you get almost like ecstatic, I mean, like I started meditating a few weeks ago. Like I'm doing it every day, and I incorporated, like I have this small Chinese jar, and I incorporate it into my practice, and it's really, like part of my personal ritual, having a super nice tea. And actually, I think it's the best way to enjoy it because you're absolutely concentrated
And then you have a sip and it's like, oh man, this is so nice.
Yeah, totally.
And meditation is about focusing on something. And if you're focusing on taste, what better way to do that?
Absolutely. And like making tea is a kind of meditation in itself, I think, I listened to a podcast from Andrew Huberman the other day where he was talking about diverging our paths of focus, of sort of like that it's very unhealthy, actually. Like, for example, in the morning, we're like making a cup of coffee and we're listening to something. And at the same time, we're like writing an email. And that's actually not very healthy. It's much healthier to do one thing. If you make a cup of coffee, make a cup of coffee. And this is what I think is really cool about tea also because it amplifies your enjoyment that much more also. It's that you're taking everything in. You're looking at the tea because tea is very beautiful also, You're brewing it, you see the leaves unfold, you smell it, you look at the color, then you drink it, and you're in that moment, right? And the ritual is the part of the meditation, it's part of the enjoyment of consuming it, and so it's like a bigger, rounder picture,
There's also a myth. In the last episode, I talked about the myth of the origin of coffee. When I started digging into tea, like I went to my friend Furkan and I told him, hey, Furkan, you're Indian. What do you have to tell me about tea? So he said, well, first of all, like we Indians, we don't export tea because our demand is higher, our consumption is higher than our production. So we import tea. He told me like Indians are not so, like in general terms, of course, not so fine in terms of tea drinking. So it's like boiling and adding sugar, like the typical thing. If you ever try to replicate the flavor of this instant teas or the teas that you buy, that's actually over-infusing tea, which is super bitter, and then balancing it with lemon and sugar. Then you got this nasty flavor,
Yeah.
And he was the first person who told me, like Chinese are much more refined than Japanese when it comes to tea. Which makes sense, tea was introduced to Japan from China. So, and he told me, do you know about the myth of the origin of tea? So there was this, like the equivalent to Hippocrates in the West. I think his name is Shendong. It's like the oldest medic you will find in Asia, right? Like this ancient medic.
Yeah.
So, and he would which these things are interesting, like, these alchemist stories. For instance, bain-marie, having something in a water bath has nothing to do with Christianism, which is what most people would think, Mary, the Virgin Mary, and so on. This was actually an alchemist who was the first one to coin that way of keeping things warm.
Yeah.
And so her name was Mary. In the case of tea, this guy, Shendong, he was the one that introduced boiling water into hygienic practices. So he would make his servants boil any water that he would drink. We're talking about thousands of years ago. And the story goes that he was near a forest and a few dry leaves that were flying with the wind fell into his water. And the servant said, we're going to throw it away. And he said, no. Let's drink it. And he discovered tea. Isn't it a nice story?
Yeah, I don't know. So it's drinking random water. If he's so cleanly about his water, and then some random shit flies, he's like,
dude, this was like a magical forest with perfect fermented sencha leaves flying in the wind. Don't you get it?
I want to go there, man. I want to go there.
What about cooking with tea? Have you had good experiences cooking with tea?
First thing that comes to mind is matcha.
Me too.
I'm not a huge fan. Matcha. Oh man, matcha is so underrated, honestly. Have you ever had real matcha? Like frothed up, just simple matcha? You would love it, man.
I have after this experience in China, I was like, I have so many tea at home that I've gotten from, every time I have a business meeting with a Japanese, they give you a present, and most of the time it's tea. So I had 20 tea bags, really good teas at home.
Hey.
And I have a few matcha bags that I haven't tried yet, but I have it just on my to-do list. Maybe I could do it today.
The only place I have had matcha, and it was really good was, in Japan, obviously. in the restaurant where I was working, because everybody would get a bowl of matcha after the meal. But also going to other kaiseki places, like really traditional high-class Japanese restaurants. And man, matcha, if you like sencha, if you like this like grassy flavor, matcha is so insanely delicious because it has this like beautiful, creamy, foamy texture, but there's no dairy or anything. It's like super light, obviously, but it has this nuttiness. And it's insane. But unfortunately, most of the matcha that you like get is really bad quality. Like when you buy matcha, you need to buy something that's called ceremonial grade matcha.
Yeah, I have a few good ones because they're like in super little envelopes that look like drugs, and he gave me like 5 of those, the guy that gave me the present. And he was like, this one is a very high quality one. So I have one of those that is supposed to be super good.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely want to start actually, like I want to buy a little matcha whisk.
Yeah.
And start drinking matcha because it's also it's super healthy for you. Super, super healthy.
I remember that there was a quote from, I don't remember who, like maybe Alain Sanderans, one of the Nouvelle Cuisine chefs in France. And he was like, this feeling of complaining or like, what have we done with our cuisine? Like at the very peak moment of the French Nouvelle Cuisine, what have we done? Like this crazy combinations, this and that, iced tea sorbet, for Christ's sake, what have we done? I've had like very good iced tea sorbets. I remember a recipe from Witzigmann from this dessert book that he has, Sweet Seductions, Süße Verführungen. It's an amazing dessert, man. It's a super nice tea sorbet.
I don't actually know which one you mean. I have to look it up.
But this is like those kind of things, like, over-infusing, balancing it with sugar and lemon, and then you have this iced tea flavor, which is what it is,
Yeah, for sure. I've done that with, there's a really nice Japanese tea called hojicha, which is like roasted stems of tea, kind of like very smoky. Yeah,
kukicha, right? Like the stems of the green tea. Okay.
That's a different one. There's hojicha. You should try it. It's like, it's kind of really roasty and smoky. It's really, really delicious. And that infused in milk and an ice cream made out of that. Absolutely delicious. Also, another Japanese green tea that I really like, it's like a working class tea, is genmaicha. I don't know if you know it, with the roasted rice.
Yeah, man. I love that. First time I had it was in Kokoro Ramen in Berlin.
Oh, yeah.
And I was what is this? Because it's like green tea, but it has also, the rice grains are roasted, right? So it has this popcorn aroma.
Exactly. Super, super nice. And I have, at one point, I put that into beurre blanc.
Ah, nice.
To like infuse.
Nice.
Yeah. You get this like tea and like also like roasted rice flavor. That was very delicious. But yeah.
That's it for this week's episode of Potluck Food Talks. If you like what we're doing, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok as Potluck Food Talks. The show airs every Monday.